in Moscow if they lose the war, then the Moscow elite, whoever replaces Putin, are not going to be able to hold on to 11 time zones of nation. It's just too big and vast a country. Now, at the very far east edges is Manchuria, which was only stolen from China 200 years ago by a czar. They want Manchuria back, and they're going to get it. The minute there's weakness, they're going to move.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And this time we are catching up with Diane Francis, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. She's editor-at-large with the National Post newspaper and has her own Substack with regular updates on geopolitics, including the war in Ukraine and Putin's Russia. Diane Francis, welcome back. Good to see you. First question. Were you punching the air when that vote came through in the House of Representatives, now obviously fully signed off by the president, approving that ever so long awaited $61 billion aid package for Ukraine?
Oh yeah, I watched the vote. I actually had to tune in the TV. I was away at a conference in Cleveland, and I punched the air. I said, "Whew, thank God that's over." However, it's not over. The war is far from over.
It has taken months to get it through, and President Biden is saying that the weapons will be there within days. And actually, we're even learning now that the long-range ATACMS have already been there and have already been used. What do you think, though, so decisively changed the mind of the Republican House Speaker, Mike Johnson?
I think there were two factors. Number one, the small crazy caucus within the Republican Party went full rogue in the Russian talking points through the personage of, what I call Moscow Marjorie Greene Taylor. And she was starting to defend Russia as being the defender of Christianity. It was ridiculous. They have destroyed 660 churches and religious sites and so on. And then she said, Zelensky was killing priests and all of this sort of thing. So they went far too far. And I think that alerted and even shocked and embarrassed Mike Johnson. And the next thing was that he had a private briefing by the president and the CIA head and said, look, no weapons, they lose this war next year. And then, of course, Europe is next. So I think he finally had a top-level briefing that had solid facts to back up the fact that it was now or never. Plus, he had this crazy contingent that, he really was very wise to distance himself from.
The dickering was disastrous for Ukrainians, is to quote what you wrote in your recent article about the impact of waiting and what that had on Ukraine. What price do you think Ukraine has paid for this delay?
Well, I think it's paid an enormous price. One estimate that I cited in my piece was that several thousand Ukrainian soldiers have died because they lacked enough ammunition and weaponry. And also, they lost about 5% of the territory of the country as the Russians slowly clawed their way back, outnumbering the Ukrainians by 10-1 in terms of manpower, but also vastly outbombing them with ammunition. And so that was a great price to pay. They will bounce back. And this package, plus the fact that Europe is finally getting its act together dramatically, is going to make a big difference.
Britain has followed suit, announcing a much smaller amount of money, though, as supply of munitions to Ukraine, the biggest, though, since February 2022. It's a £500 million funding package. Kind of brings us into line with France. Did perhaps the fear of war in the Middle East, do you think, focus the minds?
No, I don't think so. I think that's treated as a sideshow, but I do think it was a terrible distraction from the Ukrainian crisis. It really, really occupied the headspace politically in Washington. And, Israel is near and dear to both Republican and Democratic parties in the United States. And so that was a priority in the minds of many people, and they moved quickly to help them. On the other hand, this has been quite amazing. And what you see, interestingly, and Britain has always been there for Ukraine, but there are a couple of developments in the last 2 months which are very significant. First of all, Macron is taking the position of the leader of the European Union. in the shadow of Germany, which has really faltered and dithered and dilly-dallied for a lot of different reasons. France is the only nuclear power in the European Union. It is the only member with a permanent seat on the Security Council in the European Union, now that Britain has left. Now, Britain is a nuclear power as well. That is very significant. And he has joined forces with the very, very articulate and I would say the moral leadership of Poland and the Czech Republic. They have been forcibly going out, beating the bushes, getting ammunition from arsenals secretly, and helping the Ukrainian cause, and making no bones about the fact that it's do or die for Europe as well. The other thing that's happened, I think that's quite significant, is that Poland has announced that it would host nuclear weapons. That is a big deal.
Yeah, that is something I'm going to come on to ask you a little bit about. And just to stay on Emmanuel Macron for the moment, he's just given this flagship speech at the Sorbonne in Paris, in which he said that the American security umbrella is a thing of the past, and he warned that Europe can die, and he wants to deepen European defence cooperation. Do you think that this really is the beginning of a much more emboldened, energized European effort at collective security?
I think it is. I think some of it's rivalrous. And remember, Macron has a green light to bash Russia all he wants because his opponent, Marie Le Pen, has taken money from Putin. So he kills two birds with one stone. His opposition internally is a Putin lover and a Putin supported leader. And of course, the war is getting, more and more frightening to people. And Germany has reneged on remaining one of the leaders of Europe because of all of the co-option that's gone on by Russia inside Germany. Putin was a spy there for 16 years. And, he had Gerhard Schroeder in his pocket and Angela Merkel. And that's, of course, why Germany was really, a problem and helped lead to this attack on Ukraine. But France is taking the fore. And it also has enormous schlep, shall we say, or influence among the other Latin members who have been pretty silent up to this point. Italy is on side now. Greece is giving their entire arsenal of ammunition and jets and so on. And Spain is also stepping up. So Europe is huge. The European Union is the same size economically as the United States. They can do this.
You mentioned Poland, and you said that this announcement or this offer by Poland to host NATO nuclear weapons on its soil, it's in response, I understand, to Russian deployments of nuclear-capable Iskander missiles to Kaliningrad and tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus. Some reporters are drawing parallels to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is that far-fetched?
Similar, but nothing is exactly the same. History repeats. I'm not sure history repeats, but it rhymes. And so, you've got a situation where I think this is very valid. Poland is the frontline country, and it will be a target if the Russians break through Ukraine, and they are very committed morally. So I think it's tit for tat. I think if Russia's moved nukes to Belarus, then Poland should host nukes. The nuclear threat was louder after Francis Macron a month ago issued his manifesto and said, we're going to probably have to put boots on the ground because Ukraine has to win, and it can't win maybe without our boots. So that brought a immediate, remark from Medvedev, who was the prime minister of Russia, and he threatened nuclear. Well, who do they think they are? They're nuclear power. So it is escalating. The rhetoric is escalating, which hopefully won't mean that we will have the battle escalate.
We're speaking as the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting China, his second visit after last June's, to try and thaw tensions. He's expected to express deep concerns over China's aid to Russia's defense industrial base. How far does China's support go?
They have intel that it's pretty significant, but it's at the edges. They're not sending weapons. They're not sending bullets. They're not sending missiles or drones. But what they are sending is the underlying mechanisms, some of the technology that is required for their defense industry in Russia, which they don't have the capability of producing themselves. That's worrisome. They're also doing, niggling cheating. For instance, reports that they're labeling as scrap metal containers full of copper, and copper is very useful for the defense industry in Russia. They, of course, have been a collaborator, as has India, all throughout the war by buying the oil from Russia in huge gobs, and I think they should be taxed for doing that, and India too.
Anthony Blinken has pointed out that China can't have it both ways, good relations with Europe and other countries while fueling the biggest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War. How much longer do you think China can play both sides?
I think having gotten caught here and there, I think they'll back right off. I think they'll stop it. Remember, China's dependent on customers in Europe and the United States, and the customers are not happy with them. And any headlines that talk about it, I mean, the fact that they've been caught cheating when they promised not to help the war effort is probably why TikTok has been banned in the United States. I mean, this is the kind of pushback they're going to get, and it could be worse than that. And then there's a lot of reshoring and that sort of thing. And China has serious economic problems. They've done a lousy job of managing themselves, and so I think the China issue in this war is an economic warfare rather than a out and out military warfare.
But you also you write in a recent article regarding Russia that China is biding its time. What is it waiting for, do you think?
Absolutely. Look, China was put in a terrible position. If you recall, they had an Olympics they were very proud of in 2022. And just days before the big opening or closing ceremony, I've forgotten, Putin went there and he got Xi to sign a long-lasting friendship, partners for life, without telling him 3 days later he was going to genocidally invade his neighboring country. He never told him. This was hugely embarrassing. He set him up for that. And, I think he's distanced himself as much as he can. He also does trade. He really needs the energy that he gets from Russia for his economy. He's got economic trouble. Now, what I mean by they're waiting, they're on the sidelines, but they're very much involved in what happens to Russia after all of this is over. And many of us, and I've been writing quite a bit in my Substack, speculate that, once the center doesn't hold, which happened in 1989-90 in Russia, in Moscow, if they lose the war, then the Moscow elite, whoever replaces Putin, are not going to be able to hold on to 11 time zones of nation. It's just too big and vast a country. Now, at the very far east edges is Manchuria, which was only stolen from China 200 years ago by a czar. They want Manchuria back, and they're going to get it. The minute there's weakness, they're going to move, not necessarily sending troops, but they will move politically to seize influence and control over it.
So what is the doomsday scenario for the Russian Federation? How do you see the worst case scenario? Because you're talking about a kind of collapse of the Federation, mirroring the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Well, that's what happened with the Soviet Union. All of its republics, beginning with Ukraine, spun off, 15 of them. And now you have many, many republics inside the remaining Russian Federation. And I've printed a lot of maps and so on. There are the Turks, and the Turkish Organization of States issued a statement a few years ago that there are 10 autonomous, sovereign Turkic states inside the Russian Federation that should be independent. So you get that kind of pressure, ethnic pressure. They've been mistreated. Their living standards are dreadful. People in Moscow and St. Petersburg, their children are not getting drafted into the war, but the ethnic groups in the Mongolian areas and the Turkic areas and the Central Asian areas of Russia are getting drafted. And, this is a very uneven federation controlled by an elite in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It cannot last. And so what many of us are hoping for, and some people are doing, is trying to bolster these sovereignty movements. Some are already well on their way, like Chechnya. They've tried to leave twice, bloody wars. They will leave once there's weakening. And I think you will see others break away, and I think China will pounce.
And where will they pounce and how will it happen?
Manchuria. Manchuria, which would also give him Vladivostok and the Sakhalin Island, which is full of oil and gas.
I mean, this is obviously all dependent on, presumably, what happens with the war in Ukraine. And it's far from a given. It's speculation at the moment.
Correct, correct.
Where does all of this leave that so-called friendship without limits? Is that just history now between President Putin and President Xi?
I don't think it'll ever be spoken of. I think that what she has done is distance himself. Yes, they've had summits and so on, but he has publicly said a couple of years back, do not even think about using nuclear weapons. And also, it is illegal to invade another sovereign nation. So he has said those two things on the record, but he's got to play it carefully because he needs the energy, and he's got a lot of problems in his own internal economy. I mean, he let the real estate thing get out of control, and of course, the pushback over his association and his threats toward Taiwan have resulted, and the COVID resulted in a lot of factories moving to India and back to Europe and North America out of China. He's got problems.
Just to go back to what President Macron said then, was he right then when he said in that speech that the US really is preoccupied, it's really only interested in itself and in China?
Yes, it's preoccupied, but I would say it's preoccupied more with Ukraine. I think that I think he may have misspoken, but I'm very pleased that Macron has stepped up because Germany won't. And he's got a sizable army, a nuclear arsenal. He's got a lot of goodwill. It seemingly has the population behind him, and it's needed. It's needed in Western Europe. Eastern Europe has led the way morally in this war, with Poland at the forefront and the Baltics, of course. But this was very much needed. Britain, unfortunately, is no longer in the European Union. That's my opinion. But they have always been a leader in a moral sense, and also in a military aid sense on behalf of Ukraine. So you've got now a continent, including Britain, that is economically 10 times bigger than Russia, and that is committed now to building a military industrial complex.
Just to return to Russia-China relations, a recent report in the Financial Times newspaper here in the UK pointed to the Russian army's utter distrust of China going back as far as 2008, with these leaked documents that outlined exercises its military was doing, preparing for a possible invasion by China. So they were obviously taking this seriously back then. And those fears, you believe? I mean, what is the Russian position towards China at the moment?
I think they hope they'll just can stay in the background and stay passively. Remember, the border between Russia and China has been the subject of wars for many decades. They've been fighting over all this thing, and Manchuria was just stolen 200 years ago by the Tsar. And so, I think that China plays a waiting game. I think it's going to play a waiting game with Taiwan. It's not going to scoop in and get Taiwan. The thing in Taiwan that I think is misunderstood is that, yeah, sure, they would like to, grab it because it's very prosperous and it's full of ethnically Chinese Han people. But the point is that they can't take on the United States, Britain, Australia, and the rest of Asia. They have a huge navy in the region, not to occupy and take over Taiwan, but because they are completely dependent on shipping lanes remaining open. And there's lots of disputes along the route. They have to get oil from Europe and Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. They have to send their stuff that they make in the same direction. They have to keep the shipping lanes open. And I think they have a very big navy, apparently larger than the United States in the number of ships, not size. As did Britain. Britain was a trading nation. It was an empire. It had to have a big navy to get around. So I think I think China is, as a NATO official said a few years ago, China is a competitor. Russia's an enemy.
Our British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak made an announcement this week that 2.5% of the national income of GDP would be spent on defence by 2030. And he talks of an excess of authoritarian states. How does all of this that's going on fit into your current analysis of the gradual development of this so-called CRINCS, the China, Russia, Iran, North Korea alliance, as it were?
Well, I think the attack on Ukraine has united Europe unlike anything has ever done before, except the Second World War. They have got their act together, and Britain is there beside them on the same wavelength, and they are going to defend themselves against Russia with the help of the United States. Iran is I mean, we saw the attack on Jerusalem. It was really quite pathetic. Not one missile or drone landed. This is a power that is a theocracy with no major military power as yet. But what they do is, as we know, they operate in a sneaky way through proxies such as Hamas and Hezbollah, and with Russia's help. And they exchange technology and military weaponry and so on. It's a puppet of Putin's, and it's a dangerous puppet, don't get me wrong. However, they are going to end up uniting, and already kind of have, the moderate Arabs with the Israelis, because they are an outlier. They're not Arab. It's not an Arab country. And so their behavior, like Russia's, is going to end up uniting an alliance against them, which is not going to be helpful. And so I'm not saying they're neutralized, and I'm not saying Russia's neutralized, but that's the case. And as far as China, the alliance against China is they have a wall of customers who will go somewhere else if they don't behave. So, I think that the world is kind of okay from that point of view. However, Putin is the great unknown.
And North Korea?
North Korea, nobody controls. North Korea is more worrisome to China than any other country. They don't control them, and they're right there. And, when he starts to cause trouble, and there's trouble in North Korea because he's brutal. I mean, he runs it like a gulag. Suddenly China's going to be deluged with millions of refugees from North Korea, and they don't need more people. And so China has a lot of concerns about North Korea. Not a friend.
If we could just return to Ukraine now to finish, you cite two big dates which will decide the future course of the war. What are those dates, and what is the best outcome for Ukraine?
June is a big deadline. June is when Ukraine expects Russia to mount a giant offensive inside Ukraine to try and grab more territory, all of it if they can. They have mobilized, enormous, I don't know how many troops are there, 600, 700, 800,000 troops. And, this is huge. And they do have lots of weaponry and armaments and access to ammunition and their own ammunition manufacturing. June is another major issue. But they will, by that time, perhaps have an air force of F-16s, more tanks, and enough ammunition to outmaneuver the Russians, who don't have a military that's anywhere near as adept as Ukraine's. So June is big. June is going to be big and unfortunately bloody. Then the next deadline that looms is November, and whether Donald Trump is reelected or not. If Donald Trump is reelected, Ukraine will not be supported, and the world will change, nor will NATO. So, that is another very big deadline.
Diane Francis, it's been great talking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now or listen to Times Radio or go to thetimes.co.uk. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now. You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. My thanks to Louis Sykes, our producer. To support the work of Frontline, hit the subscribe button. You can also listen to Times Radio throughout the day or read it at times.co.uk. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.